welcome to this video. Yeah, this is round 5 coverage of the Gashimov Memorial, and again a little bit late, one day after the round was played. Couldn't do it earlier simply due to two facts. Had something to do in the evening, and this round was full of interesting games, so I couldn't just post a quick video there. To be honest, sometimes I don't know how some other channels or sources manage to get such a quick video up, because when do they ever look at the games before? Or I know it's tricky. I think it's just I feel like I didn't even scratch the surface now with what I'm going to present, but it is still will take quite a while because the games were so full of ideas and possibilities. Let's get going with this round, and I'm starting with one game that I'm not going to cover. Basically, Mamedov playing white here against Mickey Adams. We can have a quick look there, but there's not much to really analyze. We had a closed Ruy Lopez, and Mamedov goes for d4, so-called Yates variation. It's a sideline. h3 is more popular. The idea of h3 is that this bishop g4 move should be prevented when you have d4 coming. So it's a prophylactic move against bishop g4, and therefore d4 is answered with bishop g4. Yeah, black has pressure against d4 now. Yeah, this is still an interesting line for white to play. Bishop e3, and here we get an interesting transformation. Black gets in c5, and if white now would go for a setup with d5, we have a structure that looks very much like a Benoni. Yeah, I have some experience on the black side of this line, and here Adams took. This is something that I usually tend to avoid early, but it's not bad or anything. It's just a different way to play. In this game, white now went with g4, pushing the bishop back, and ultimately black got in d5. And this led to simplifications in the center. White always had the slightly more active pieces. We will see how it unfolded. Yeah, here like this. White has slightly more activity with the pieces, but g4 is a move that is weakening the king long term. In the game, it was a fine balance between those two factors. Yeah, Adams had to be a little bit cautious because of the activity as mentioned, but he's a very precise player in somewhat, let's say, in tidy positions, in positions that you can really calculate properly. He sometimes has his bad moments when it comes to totally irrational position, but if it's kind of strategical build-up, then he rarely makes any inaccurate moves. And this happened here. They continued for quite a longish while, but ultimately agreed to draw here after the trade. We will have the whole queen side traded, and then it's totally dead. This wasn't a totally uninteresting game, but the others were just so full of content that I have really no alternative to cut this to basically nothing. Let's have a look at Caruana Giri next. Let me find my notes. They are awfully long. Got a couple of pages here. Okay, Caruana starts with knight f3. He's not playing e4 in this tournament, it seems. And we have Catalan. Giri goes for bishop b4 check. That's one of the two main lines nowadays. The other being the open Catalan. Oops, that was a bit much. The other being the open Catalan with d takes c4 or d takes c4 later after bishop e7 and castles. The check is an interesting alternative. What black is doing by inserting the check is giving white the extra move bishop d2, and this extra move quite often is nothing that white particularly likes to have, because very often the best setup is b3 and the bishop to b2, and that's not possible with the bishop already on d2. Yeah, it's a well-known variation. c6, queen c2, knight d7. I'm sorry, I thought b6, but it was this move order. Yeah, what black wants to do ultimately, put the bishop most of the time to a6, maybe rook c8, c5, get the c file open against the queen. Black has to solve the bishop c8 problem. This is simply not a great piece, and if you solve this issue, get this activated, traded, and simplify in the center to equalize completely, black is okay. So he tries to go for that, bishop to a6, and now white went with a4. Yeah, this is one of the modern ways to treat this position. In former times, white also played bishop f4 and knight c3, those kind of setups. a4, a5 is a newer idea. c5 was played, and now a5. Yeah, here Giri goes for rook c8, which is, it seems, a known move. In a game Wang Hao, Peter Leko, they also had rook c8 on the board, so it's not new. I was thinking that also b5 might be an interesting move here, but well, I didn't put any deep analysis in there. White can take, actually. Maybe I'm... Yeah, sorry. I read my notes wrong. I thought after rook c8, queen a2 was played, and now b5. That's what I wanted to say. This, I thought, was an interesting alternative to what was played in the game. In the game, Giri went for knight b8. Yeah, white was threatening a b6 and taking this bishop, so you have to do something. Knight b8 takes, knight c3. The whole situation here is about the rook opposite the queen. White has the slightly better pieces. The rook opposite the queen, and the bishop on g2 is better placed than the bishop on a6. White has the better pieces in a situation where there's this huge central tension. This is not a simple situation for black at all. And quite quickly, Giri gets into trouble. He took here on c4 and just bishop f4. Yeah, opening up the d file and getting the idea d takes c5 in. Took here with tempo, queen takes. Yeah, and now we come to a situation where the next move is absolutely crucial, it seems. Giri went for bishop b7. Yeah, black is a pawn up, but white is threatening d takes. My mouse is acting up. It's threatening to capture on c5 with a tempo, and this situation is very awkward for black. I think, at least this is what the engine is recommending, that black probably had to go c4 first to keep the c file closed, and after, let's say, queen c2, play bishop b7. Yeah, white was threatening bishop takes b8, rook a6, so he has to have to do something. Bishop b7, and now after d5, which is the most promising move, I think, after d5, e takes d5, rook a7, white has a very substantial initiative, but it doesn't seem that he's winning. White has sacrificed 2 pawns here, as mentioned, for a big initiative, but it's not flat out winning. In the game, after bishop b7, d takes c5, it seems that from a purely analytical point of view, if you just view this as a let's say a computer exercise, yeah, you give it to an engine, you probably have to conclude that white even is winning, but it is absolutely not easy to play, and we will see that Caruana had to solve quite a number of problems there to really get to a winning position. Knight bd7 was played, of course, no alternative, and rook to a7. Yeah, we immediately see that white has a huge pressure, but it is difficult to believe that white should be winning. However, it is probably the case, but it's not easy to prove. Giri took on f3. That looks very logical. Bishop takes, and now he took with the knight. Yeah, tempo on the queen. I was thinking, what about bishop c5 in this position? Is this an idea? The problem is that white already has ideas like that when you will win the knight there. Yeah, the pinning situation on the d file is very awkward. Also, if white takes with the pawn, you're in this pin will also lose material. So knight c5, queen to b1. This is all fine. He went back now to d7. Are there alternatives? I looked at knight fd7, but then knight e4 will win this material here, as knight d5 is the threat. There's really no way out. You can go to e8, but this also loses tons of material. Plus a huge initiative. White is winning material, but keeps a big initiative. I thought queen e8 maybe, but again, knight b5, knight d6. d6 is a problem. Something like that, for example. Yeah, white will win the exchange and the b6 pawn back with an ongoing initiative. All pieces are active. Yeah, this is what Giri played. That's the toughest defense. Now knight b5 was played. That's also correct. And rook c5. Yeah, black doesn't have many moves. It seems that here there is an alternative or an improvement. This was Caruana's move. The computer gives bishop e3 and essentially it says white wins, yeah, with something like plus 2 point something. Yeah, well, it's all nice and good if you see it see it as the engine evaluation, but how do you prove that? Why it is really a win? Okay, if black retreats the rook, white has bishop d4 with this idea. Bishop f6 wins material. This is in fact relatively simple, but what isn't so simple, at least in my book, is to see that sometimes that even if black is giving up the exchange, even then white is not just clearly better but truly winning. For example, first glance I thought, okay, why not, let's say queen c8. Let's give up the exchange, yeah, like this, and take with the bishop. This is a well-anchored bishop there on c5. Quite often black would be able to compensate for being the exchange down. But the problem is that white is not just an exchange up. With rook c7 he will win even more material, because whatever you do, you're in deadly pins. This will win the whole knight there. Or alternatively, this wins the knight. So you're not just giving up the exchange, you're completely giving up everything basically, or you lose more material is the right way to phrase it. It seems that bishop e3 wins. Bishop c7 is also keeping a huge advantage, but bishop e3 seems to be a bit better. This is very difficult though for a human player to assess, no matter how strong the player is. In this situation here, white still, as mentioned, is much better. A move like, let's say, queen b3 or bishop f4 keeps the pressure on. Caruana decided to play bishop d6. This is not as convincing, and we will see soon why. The trade is helping black a little bit to organize his play. After queen d8, knight e4, it looks very, very problematic, but rook c7 is just about saving. Yeah, the rook is covering the 7th rank. White, of course, has enough initiative to check, to compensate for the pawn, like here. Yeah, we see that we cover a7, something like this is winning the knight. Yeah, white's initiative is strong, but it's not. Yeah, it's not enough to win this terribly pinned knight there. Yeah, it looks bad, but it seems that there is no win anymore. Yeah, so after a while, Caruana decided to trade down and simplify the position. With the rook and bishop, he got some initiative on the king, but Giri was very alert. He went with knight e4. That's a very strong way to completely clarify matters. The knight is threatening basically to go back to the king side and shore up the defenses. And after bishop e4, which is Caruana's move, check, or was Caruana's move, black has this counter-attacking idea, threatening mate. And white doesn't have a single check. So white has to give material back there. There's no alternative. He went queen h1, and now after the capture we see the simplification to a rook endgame. that was drawn shortly afterwards. So a very narrow escape here for Giri, who probably was lost at more than 1 point. However, this is the kind of thing where, if we go back here, that bishop e3 is ultimately winning. This is something that is not totally simple or obvious for a human player, especially in cases where you win the exchange. Very often this kind of win of the exchange, when there's a bishop on c5 that is cemented by the pawn, will not lead to much, but in this case it does. Yeah, I mean, as we see here, bishop c7 was a move that Caruana spent 13 minutes on, and it seems that bishop e3, somehow he couldn't make it work completely, or overlooked some kind of idea. This is a situation where just reading out the computer evaluation is completely useless, as it seems like Caruana was spoiling a very simple win or whatever. It's not the case. It was simply not that easy. Okay, next game is Mamedov-Kramnik. Yeah, again, we see this classical Queen's Gambit move order by Kramnik, and his idea is that while he accepts the exchange variation, of course, this is what we have seen earlier in the game Wesley saw Mickey Adams. While he's accepting that, he also gives himself more options here on move 4, and the option that he goes for is c5. The semi-Tarrasch or improved Tarrasch, probably Tarrasch himself wouldn't think of this as an improved version. He liked to have the isolated pawn. But, well, Kramnik has played this before, so it was something that Mamedov certainly could have expected, at least as one of the possible lines.
Check.
Yeah, the check here.
Check.
Trades and castles. White is developing. Yeah, it's all very normal. H6 is not a very common move, but it is. It has been seen before. For example, this setup was also tested recently in a game Vachier-Lagrave with white against Arkady Neidich in the Baden-Baden tournament in February. Yeah, what is the idea of black setup? Black has traded 2 minor pieces, 1 bishop and 1 knight, and this is something that is in general quite favorable for him in this particular situation, because black has less space and he's not so cramped if he has traded a couple of pieces. With the bishop traded, quite often you also get a natural square or natural squares for the queen, like this and this maybe, and something like queen e7, knight d7, rook c8 could be a setup, or you can play with knight c6, knight e7. This position and this overall setup has been known for a very long time. It was always considered to be slightly more comfortable for white, but in recent years it has been defended quite successfully by some black players. Kramnik is one of them. There are also some other players who went for that. So it's not something that is not a super fashionable line, but certainly something that is on the agenda nowadays. Queen e3, that seems to be, technically speaking, a novelty, but it's a fairly normal way to try to activate the queen. Knight c6, and h4, gaining space on the king side. Knight to e7 and h5. Yeah, this h4 push is an idea that we see quite frequently in positions like that. White has a little bit more space in the center and tries to set up for an attack on black's king ultimately. What white ideally wants to do is to get this some sort of battery. Yeah? The bishop maybe somewhere here, queen on d3, queen h7 mate, this kind of thing. In an ideal world, white manages that, and we will see that in the game this idea comes into play. In general, it takes space, and space is very highly valued nowadays. The downside of the pawn on h5 can be that under unfavorable circumstances it might be a pawn that can be attacked. Yeah, just imagine a knight on f7 would probably pick up this pawn. Yeah, black went with queen d6 and d5 now by Mamedov. This is a very well-known idea in this type of position. White is pushing the pawn. It looks like at first he's just blundering this pawn, but that's not the case. The idea is that after e takes d5, white pushes e5. Yeah, there's a very classic, there are many classic games in the 60s where this was played. Let me think about this. Is this Polugajewski Tal? Not quite sure. There are a number of classic games there where this idea was played. White is sealing the long diagonal with d5, then pushes with e5, opening up the diagonal there. Here white has very nice strategic compensation for the pawn. He will often go knight to d4. Yeah, sorry about that. I have to get a new mouse, it seems. It does weird things to me. Yeah, knight probably to d4. And yeah, white has attacking chances. Kramnik didn't take. He exchanged and played rook c8. I think this is also a very good and practical decision. There's really nothing much to be gained by taking the pawn. With the trades, it is much more comfortable for black in comparison. In this situation, white shouldn't trade this, as the more pieces are traded, the more problematic his potential compensation becomes. If he is forced to take here, for example, after bishop e6, black is just better. This pawn is a weakness, and the two pawns against one pawn on the queen side promise black a good game. Also now h5 tends to be weakish. Yeah, with more pieces traded, this is the case. So white played rook e1. That's much better, keeping pieces on the board. Again, if black takes, e5 gives white compensation. It doesn't seem to be overwhelming for white, so it's not exactly that Kramnik couldn't take, but it's certainly something you don't like to do, giving the opponent an initiative, especially keeping in mind that Mamedov is very good in dynamic positions, so not a great idea to grab the pawn. So he went rook c3. I think also preferable move. Queen d2, rook c5. He just keeps the central tension and always having in mind that capturing is no problem for black at all. All his pieces are fine, and white doesn't have any particularly great idea here. Note that it's really much better to not have any pawn there. Yeah, the bishop now has a useful role on b7. Okay, we have bishop to b1. Yeah, trying to set up the mentioned battery. And here Kramnik played king to f8. He's just stepping out of a possible check and gets the king a little bit nearer to the center. Queen d3, as mentioned, this is the idea. And rook c8. Black is just waiting. And now a3 was played. Yeah, looking at keeping the b4 square under control and possibly setting up for bishop to a2. Yeah, this is at least for me a slightly mysterious moment now, because Kramnik plays the move e5, and while this is not terrible for black, I still was surprised that he did that, because I don't see a huge incentive to do it at the moment, because I mean, white is not threatening much. At least I don't see it. I mean, this is probably my my shortcomings there coming into play, but I don't see what white is threatening. I mean, the computer also doesn't see much there in terms of activity. I wasn't really sure if white has something great if I just go rook c5 again. I know it looks weird, yeah, going back and coming back to c5, but if black waits, what exactly is white doing? How is white improving? You can play bishop a2, for example. No problem whatsoever. But then I really might take. And I'm not sure that this is enough compensation. Yeah, it looks like a dangerous pin, but black can step out there. Yeah, I mean, this is just no threat at all. I can take this.
Check.
There's always knight g8. I'm not quite sure if e5 was really a necessary move. The problem is a little bit that now you give white the protected passer on d5. Yeah, and you have to block it with the queen. And it's not so easy to regroup. If for some magic, with some magic trick, black could, let's say, make those two, yeah, trade places, black would be in an excellent shape. Yeah, but the knight is on e7 and the queen on d6. It's not so comfortable. Well, as we will see, it's nothing terrible for black, but well, still a decision that I do question a little bit to play e5. I mean, at least I didn't see why this was necessary. Okay, but as I said, it's not the end of the world. Only a little bit later it becomes quite critical. d6 now by Mamedov. Yeah, note that he has much more time on the clock. Knight c6. And now we come to an absolute key moment of this game, and a moment where yeah, the fate of this game is basically decided. Mamedov now played knight takes b6, and he did so rather quickly. A bit of a shocking move. Why is this even possible? Yeah, the point is that we will see what the point is in the game. Kramnik did take the knight. The thing is that this is a mistake. After the capture, queen b3. That was the idea. Queen g8 mate. Yeah, and black really only has one way to stop that. This is bishop e6. This was played in the game. I'm showing you just the game to get so that you can easily compare. White now has this pawn there on d6. Remember this position. Try to remember this. If we go back, here he could have played, but not. That's absolutely not easy to see. Taking with the queen. That looks like a very scary decision, because again queen b3 is a possibility, but then bishop e6 is almost, look at this, the same thing, except for the fact that there is no pawn on d6, and this difference is of course enormous. It's just a very crucial pawn that white is up in the other line. So why didn't he play queen d6? Probably, my guess is that he was also irritated by this move, knight a4. This saved the knight with a tempo, and the rook doesn't have many squares. But rook a5 is possible. There is no problem with that move. Queen b3 still can be answered by bishop e6. I think that Kramnik, somewhere around these lines, probably had some kind of miscalculation. It is all hanging by a thread. Yeah, you know, it's really a narrow escape all the time. You get this back, bishop b7, and just about this move covers the knight. I don't know. I really don't know what exactly he missed there, but it's clear that after a b6, queen b3, bishop e6. Oops, I'm sorry. That this position is very close to a winning one for white. I am not completely sure if it is winning, to be honest, but it is of course, yeah, very, very good winning chances. The pawn is super strong there on d6, and white has this possibility now to get the rook into the game and open up the queen side. I think the next, or this sequence is very, very logical. Yeah, like this, and c5 was played. Right, c6.
Check.
And black got this back. I did this a bit too quickly. I have to apologize there. Let's check this. White went a4. Black took, and rook to b8. The idea is that now rook e8 is the threat to promote. So black only has one defense. This is f5, takes, knight c6. Yeah, both captures
Check.
lose material. Knight c6 to cover this d8 square. a3, sending the rook back. Yeah, it looks like black is getting this pawn, and the next move is very important. If white is not doing that, he's returning this pawn now. If white is not doing that, he risks to get into a situation where he is material up but has no way forward. Yeah, the knight coming to f6, this is the issue. Let's say white is not doing that and he goes, I don't know, something like that, let's say. Here black might put the knight on f6 and trying to set up a dark squared blockade. Yeah, it's very difficult to see how white should break through there. White still has chances, but it's very difficult. I think what Mamedov did was better. He returned the pawn and he got black into this very uncomfortable bind. The bishop on f5 is just very much better than the knight, and black has a hard time to move any of his pieces. However, I'm not totally sure that this is really a win because of one particular thing. If we look at this, g3, rook d2, d3, and now Kramnik went knight c5. I think after knight c5 he probably is lost. And I'm not completely sure if white has a win after a passive defense. I mean, nobody really wants to defend passively, but I'm not totally convinced that white wins. Maybe he does, but I'm not, as mentioned, totally sure. There are some ways that white can try to play this position. The main one being to try to advance with the king, like this. Yeah, or f3 to e4. And also there is the move, sometimes bishop g6 check. Or this check on g6 or a4, pushing the king back and then entering with the rook. There are some lines there that do win for white, but it's not a forced issue. For example, I can put something on the board like this, let's say, and here. It's no real analysis, I know, but I just want to show you some ideas. For example, here bishop c2, a4 is quite interesting. Yeah, so this kind of thing. I just want to get to the idea. Yeah, in a situation where white's king is quite active, here the move bishop g6 check. This could be a way forward. After takes, white is threatening g7. So king f8 has to be played, and now white enters with his king. This could be a winning idea, but I'm not really convinced that white is able to force that. So maybe knight f8 was a bit tougher, but it's not a move that you want to play. I totally understand that Kramnik didn't play it, and I'm not sure that it saves him anyhow. It's probably still a loss, but at least I couldn't really find a totally clear way forward. After knight c5, we see that ultimately after a couple of intermediate moves, the pawn there on h6 is falling. At least black got a little bit of temporary activity, but it's yeah, white didn't even take that, preferring to stay active and keep this bind. e4, yeah, and now king e3, yeah, it's important. Yeah, if you take with the rook, knight e5, somehow black is untangling and well, taking with the bishop. Again, somehow, no, it's better to keep this pressure on. King e3, and now take. Yeah, that's the more precise way to take it. Yeah, black could check a little bit, but ultimately this pawn was falling. Yeah, we had a couple of more moves. Kramnik was continuing for quite a while here. yeah, some kind of stalemate defense.
Check.
Maybe was
Check.
what he hoped for, but it's not happening. Yeah, here white is just easily winning with bishop to e2, and then you will pick up the pawn. Yeah, a tricky game. This knight takes b6 idea essentially won the game. Here, this knight takes b6, that was a very good chance for white that Mamedov correctly tried to take with knight b6. It was very difficult, however, to tell that or to evaluate that correctly. And look at that, Kramnik only had five minutes, so especially considering, I mean, this is a move he certainly thought about, but probably somewhere here he missed something or misevaluated something. It's a very easy thing for the engine to tell you this and that, but it's not easy to play, especially with the clock ticking down. So this means that Kramnik is back on 50% score, and Mamedov got his first win in. Okay, so where are my notes? I'm a bit disorganized here. Here, yeah, this is the next game. The next game is Carlsen with white against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And as I read on Twitter, Carlsen hasn't won against him for about 10 years or so. He doesn't seem to be the most comfortable opponent, at least in classical chess. There were a couple of draws, and I remember that MVL beat him also in the Biel tournament some years ago. So let's get going. Carlsen plays this. Okay, something entirely different, not 1e4, not d4, but he sometimes goes for this very slowish knight f3, g3 setups. Interesting also for me because I play that as well. And oh, 5 minutes. I didn't know the clock times. Yeah, black took 5 minutes for b5. Yeah, of course, b5 or b4 is a move to be skeptical about in the opening, but this is one of the cases where b5 has a pretty decent reputation, actually, simply because white is committed to g3, so the natural way to go about this b-pawn move e4 is not possible here. It doesn't make any sense, at least. So this is not the same as, let's say, knight f3 b5, which is really a bad line. I mean, I recently had this on the board, and I will show you this game in the near future. This is just bad for black. It's just like that. b5 is a bad move. But with this inserted, it's a different issue. e4 now is not possible, and with a somewhat slowish type of game that we get, it is justified. Bishop g2, yeah, note that Carlsen also took a while, so they were not really playing on any prep here. Bishop b7 and knight a3. This is one of the ways to fight this setup. When I'm playing this as white, I very often have played like this, d3 and then e4, sort of a King's Indian attack style. It's an entirely different approach to what Carlsen does. To be honest, I like what he played. I think it's a very decent way to play. Knight a3 attacks the pawn. a6, c4. That does make a lot of sense. Yeah, white is attacking the pawn there on b5, and if b4, and that was played, he goes to c2. Black has alternatives here, and even some quite funky ones. An interesting move that is possible here is e5. Looks very weird, but why not? We use the pin there on the diagonal and gain some space with black. If white is taking on b5 now, black is just taking here and here. And this is not a bad position at all. Yeah, black can go d6 later, knight d7. b5 is not a substantial weakness at all. It's a playable position. Interesting alternative. Okay, this is what Maxime played. Knight c2 and e6. d4, a5. Yeah, all quite normal. Yeah, it's a position that, from black's point of view, looks a little bit like a Queen's Indian, but with pawns very far advanced, and white, sorry, has the knight on this slightly awkward c2 square. So it's a really original position. Yeah, what did Carlsen play now? He went for d5. This idea is well known in the Queen's Indian structures, with this, where you have this standoff between the two bishops. After e takes d5, that was not played, but after e takes d5, white has this idea. Yeah, opening up the diagonal and therefore getting the pawn back on d5. There are possibilities for black to try to hold the pawn, but they are not really great. Let's say like this, takes here and knight f5. This is a really great position for white with a huge compensation. Yeah, let's say castles, e4, has to go back, queen g4. There is a pawn sacrifice line in the Queen's Indian that is quite comparable, and this is a far better version of that. This knight will come to a good place as well later, and white has a very quick and aggressive development. So it's not a good idea to take the pawn. Knight a6, knight d4, knight c5. So that looks very logical. It's a good square there on c5. Rook e1, castles e4. So white has gained some space in the center. It still shouldn't be terrible for black though. e5 was played. Not an easy decision, but it's difficult to allow e5 for white. Yeah, if you give white e5, f4, yeah, that looks a lot like a steamroller. You shouldn't do that probably. So e5, knight f5, d6, all normal. And bishop g5 by Carlsen. This is a very good move, and it's a very good move for one particular reason. It sets a little trap. And well, a black player here, Vachier-Lagrave, he somehow fell into this trap. It's not so easy to see what's happening, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what black's calculation was here, because, well, he took on d5. Let's just tell it right away. It took him 14 minutes, and then he took on d5. However, when we see the position coming up, we quickly see how uncomfortable this is for black. So I'm not completely sure what his rationale was. I think they did a press conference afterwards, but I did not watch that yet. What black probably should do is play a slow move. Yeah, rook e8 or something. Rook e8, possibly bishop c8, trying to trade this knight off. I mean, white is better here. Yeah, let's say even the capture is not not a terribly bad idea.
Check.
Gaining the bishops and the space like back here, and then trying to play on the queen side. Black doesn't have some great counterplay. White is slightly better at least, but I think he still had to do that. After knight takes d5, there was a big problem, and we will see now. Yeah, maybe you can have a look there if you want to trade this as a little puzzle. It's not a purely tactical one, but very nice to look at. Yeah, what did Carlsen play? Maybe take a few moments and then try to find out what he played. Yeah, I'm going to tell you the move. He went bishop to h6. That's a very strong move. The problem is that now the knight here hangs, of course, and g7 also hangs. And how should black defend? There's really no choice. You have to take there.
Check.
Check. And white captured. Now we see that white is a pawn down, but, well, the pawn is essentially like h7 or h6, so they're both pretty much worthless. And white's compensation for the pawn is really tremendous. He has an unchallenged knight on f5, which is very strong and can easily be supported by bishop h3, sometimes knight e3. And black's pawn on c7 is also quite backward and doesn't play a huge role at the moment. Yeah, white has a great position here, so I'm not quite sure why black allowed that. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe he saw this and the other position and thought, okay, this is not as dramatic. But I think black definitely is in some trouble. Here the computer wants to go h5, but I think misevaluates the position. What I'm saying is that if you give it to an engine, it says that this position here, let's say, I'm just putting some moves out that make sense. They're not necessarily the absolute best ones, but this kind of position, for example, if you give it to Houdini, it gives a slight advantage for white, but I think this is simply not enough. White is much better in this position. I mean, yeah, if you just imagine the bishop on h3 is controlling this diagonal, and white is also threatening to put a knight on f5 later. In many cases, we will have bishop traded against this knight, and ultimately a sacrifice on c5 when the c file will be opened. White just has a great pressure for no risk at all. So this is more than just a slight advantage. The whole position, I think, is very awkward for black to play. He went king h8, h4, bishop back. Yeah, here's interesting. Carlsen could have taken on h6, but he didn't bother with that. It's not a bad move at all. You can take there and go back to f5, but he just said, basically decided that this is not worth taking. He concentrated on getting his pieces coordinated in relation to the f5 square. Yeah, this kind of thing. Yeah, that's a very nice position now for white. Yeah, look at those two pieces. Yeah, exerting a great dominating situation here on the light squares. Very, very awkward for black. He took the knight off. Knight takes. And here we come to a moment where where the next move can be easily criticized, and it's definitely not helping black. But I totally understand why he played it. I mean, look at this. This bishop here on g7 is incarcerated. It can absolutely not move. And here we see also one reason why maybe Carlsen didn't want to take on h6. Just imagine the pawn on h6 would be gone here. Then bishop to h6 is a move. And here, well, just one pawn. Eh? It's just a better situation here probably with the pawn on h6. Yeah, this is what black played now, and it ultimately led to his defeat probably. But I really have a hard time to suggest ideas here. What exactly is it that black should do? If I'm really not having a better idea as white, I'm just playing rook c1, rook c4, other rook to c1 and take on c5. Yeah, putting enormous pressure there. And this is just one possibility. White's compensation is really, really great here for the pawn. Yeah, c6. The problem with the move is, have a look. White takes, rook c8. And now Carlsen has a very strong move, queen to d1. The idea is to get the queen on this fantastic square. And yeah, there's not much else there. Took here. Important is that knight takes e4 is failing due to bishop g4. It's a nice idea. Keeping this attacked and threatening knight g7. This wins material for white. So rook c6, queen d5. This, yeah, what a position. Yeah? White has three excellent pieces on the light square. It's a very, very harmonious picture. Bishop f8. Yeah, here white has a basic choice. He can take f7 with the bishop or with the queen, and Carlsen took with the queen. I think both moves were good. He probably figured that in an endgame without queens, it will be easier for him to convert his strategic advantage.
Check.
At those trades. b3. Yeah, note that black is totally passive. No? The king cannot move. It is boxed in. The bishop can almost not move. Yeah, it can go to g7, then to f6, then back. Yeah? So you have a hard time to improve. d6 is weak, h6 is weak, and it's equal material. Yeah? White doesn't even have something sacrificed. This position is probably a win for white with excellent technical play. And well, we know that Carlsen is not the kind of player who fails at technical play, at least in the vast amount of time. Yeah, nice regrouping, putting pressure on d6. Yeah, black is giving up material, but well, really, what is it that he should have done? Like this. Let's say you can go here. Again, take. Tja, this is simply not defensible in this position. This was taken, and black has a little hope for counterplay, but bishop c6 is a strong move, threatening rook d7, and there's really no way to save this knight, or to play differently. If you go knight a6, for example, white is going to d5 and still has everything under control. Yeah, this was played.
Check.
Black was hoping for this pin, but it ultimately didn't help. Rook h7 was possible. After rook c6 now,
check.
This wins everything. So king g6 was played. Yeah, note that if a2, rook a7 will lead to a pretty easy win after rook c6, rook a2. Yeah, white has 4 pawns against 2, and very quickly will get passes that do win the game. Yeah, this is what black tried. Back here, threatening this check. King there, h5. Yeah, the idea is a mating net, and we will see how this unfolds. Again, rook h6 is the idea. And here, the mating idea, rook f7, rook f5, is deciding the game. So if black promotes, we have
check. Checkmate.
This cute checkmate. Yeah, in the actual game, that was resignation, right? Yes, here MVL resigned. Yeah, very nice game by the world champion. This idea with bishop h6 was quite aesthetic. I think knight d5, bishop h6. So very nice way to transform the position into something that is clear compensation and very, very awkward to defend. It's not just the pure quality of the position that is good for white, but also the practical difficulties that are associated with it. It's very, very awkward to play this position for black. Okay, let's have a look now at the final game of this coverage. This is Vachier-Anand with white playing Wesley So, the tournament leader. Yeah, again, e4 by Vichy, no d4. Seems that for this tournament he's focusing more on his old weapon, the king pawn, and d3. Yeah, this is one of the earlier anti-marshal lines. A good choice if you want to avoid the marshal. However, d3 is of course limiting white's options quite a bit. You don't get c3, d4 in anymore, quite obviously. Yeah, black has a number of options there. b5 is what Wesley played, bishop b3, and now he castled. In this position, black has a choice. I, for what it's worth, play d6 in this position. The idea being that after a possible a4, I can defend with bishop to d7. But this is all matter of personal preference. He castled. Anand now went knight c3. An interesting idea, yeah, putting the knight there. Ideas can be knight to d5 sometimes, or knight e2 to g3. The typical regrouping, knight to g3, just with a different route, not via f1, yeah, like that, but via e2. Black played d6, a3. Now we have to, as white, take care about the bishop. Yeah, if white is playing some lazy move, knight a5 will gain the bishop pair. So a3, and now Wesley played knight b8. Yeah, this is an interesting move. It is of course well known, this idea, from the Breyer variation in the Ruy-Lopez closed main line with 9h3, knight b8 in order to regroup the knight to d7, play c6 possibly, or the c pawn in general, sometimes also to c5. Very well known idea. It is important to note that this position was reached earlier this year in the game Caruana with white against Wesley. So it's not something that was coming unexpected to the former world champion here with the white pieces. And he's coming up with one of his novelties, knight to g5. This looks a bit crude, right? What is the idea of this move? At first glance you think, okay, well, this is crazy. Yeah? If black goes h6, what are you doing then? Just back? What's the point? The point is, of course, not the retreat to f3. White is not planning to just lose two moves. After h6, he had something else in store. It wasn't happening. I mean, h6 was not played, but the point of h6 can only be to play the really cool move f4. Yeah, this is nice, right? f4. Yeah, what is the point f4? If black takes the knight, let's look at this. White is all of a sudden using the open f file here, and g6 is a strong possibility that is in the position. This is a very tricky position for black to play. If you go back, just to show it, queen h5 or g6 are both already leading to a winning position. g6, knight f6, rook f6, and this is checkmate in a couple of moves. Yeah, rook e8, bishop f7,
check,
knight d5, and my mouse, queen h8 mate, unavoidable. It's amazing, right, how quick this attack is coming all of a sudden. Yeah, better is knight g4. We can have a look at this a little bit. This is not as clear. g6, and then probably, let's look what happens if there's a slowish move like c6. Then white will take on f7, and you can take with the pawn or with the bishop, for example, like this.
check,
h3, knight back, and queen h5. This is a fantastic attack for white. This capture of the knight on g5 looks very risky. Very risky. I mean, especially considering that it is something that probably wasn't expected, as knight g5 is not a move that pops up in any engine. I mean, if you let it show like, okay, give me your top 8 moves, then there's somewhere knight g5, but the engine always wants to play knight g5, h6, and then back, and evaluates like, okay, this didn't help me much, but it also didn't hurt me much. So this was a complete surprise here for the black player. There is, however, an alternative, and this is to take on f4. This is also interesting. In this situation, of course, the knight is still hanging, and this cannot be the point. I mean, just to show,
check,
in this kind of situation, black is totally fine. He has 2 minor pieces for rook and pawn, and at the moment, the rooks are not doing that much. There's also the problem here in the position, and we will see something comparable later, that white has no clear way forward with his pawns in the center. If white pushes like that, he's in much danger that some d5 move will actually allow later jump to a light square there. So this is not a good idea for white. So after h6, f4 takes. What was white's idea? I can only guess, but I think probably just back. That's really funny. After g5, we have a situation that is very much like the king's gambit, yeah, with the capture and g5, but it's a king's gambit out of the Spanish. Very interesting position. I think even more interesting is the move knight h3 actually. The idea is that if black takes this, white will probably get this back anyway. Yeah, just with bishop f4, as g5 h4 looks very tricky. Yeah, it is funny, but white can do this here, yeah, even in front of his king, because his pieces are just far more active here, and the bishop especially here is very, very strong. This is much, much better for white. So g5 is probably better, but here white has a typical king's gambit style sacrifice. Takes, takes. Funny, it's really like a king's gambit. King h7, for example, keeping this pawn protected, and d4. It's quite funny. If you give this to an engine, it says about 0. It says equality. And if you see this, a position where white has sacrificed a piece for one pawn, and the engine claims equality, then you know that black is in trouble. Probably in serious trouble. And if you give the engine more time, it probably will show that white is much better here. I mean, you can easily see that white's initiative is very strong. Queen d2 comes with a tempo on the pawn. The rook is on the half-open f-file, and all those pieces are not relevant at the moment. So it's clear that white has a tremendous compensation. Also, for practical purposes, I think it was a very good decision by So not to play h6. What he came up with is a funny move. He just went back to c6. Yeah, knight was on b8, then to c6, then now back to b8, and so on. But the situation has changed. His idea is, and this is really quite logical, to put the knight on d4 with a tempo and then re-evaluate. Bishop a2, knight d4, knight e2. So white is going for a trade, takes,
check.
Takes. This is what happened in the game. Yeah, and now a very interesting moment again. He now played h6. So this idea that was in the position already a couple of moves ago is now again, he re-examined it and actually played h6. An interesting situation is arising here if black is not doing that. I would have rather preferred or thought of a move like c5, something like that, trying to ignore this knight. It's not so easy to do, but I was thinking that this might be an idea. However, after f4, first impression is white just has a nice initiative there, using the rook on the f-file and possibly doing something there with even f5, g4, pawn storm might be on the cards. The computer is not giving white something substantial here, even the opposite. It says it's at best equal for white, but this is not an evaluation that I think a human player would agree with so easily. First glance, it looks nice for white, and I'm not sure exactly how the computer is justifying his evaluation, let's say. One idea might be to push c4 at the right moment. I'm aware of that, but still I understand that this didn't look too attractive for black here. He went h6 ultimately, and tried to played this show me move. Yeah, okay, of course f4. Yeah, there's no way back. Something like knight f3 is, of course, it's possible, but it kind of, it misses the point. And also, to be perfectly honest, if Anand wants to do something in this event, he has to get a win in somewhere. And, better do it against the leader of the event, if possible. Okay, f4. And it also seems to be objectively, at least, very interesting. Yeah, now he took the piece. Yeah, it took him a long while. I mean, f4 I think was pretty clear that this was coming, so I'm a bit surprised that he took so long there. I mean, you actually I think you have to make this decision when you play h6 probably, or the other idea might be, or explanation might be, that he had something in mind, but then here found some problem with it. Here, as I said, he took it. What else? Black again can take on f4. This certainly was an alternative. As before, the move knight f7, cannot
Check.
be the idea. Here black is just in good shape. I think this is even better than the version that we had before, as d5 is very easily coming. Here black is just better. So that wasn't the idea. After e takes f4, only knight f3 can be the point. And here after g5 has to be played. If white gets in bishop f4, he's again just better. Okay, g5, yeah, and now g3. That must be the idea. Everything else doesn't make much sense. Yeah, and this is in fact very interesting. Yeah, for example, if black takes and white recaptures, we again have something like the king's gambit. Yeah, and the big point is that in many cases here we will get compensation with this weak f5 square. A possible continuation from here is the move d5, e5, knight h5, and then I wrote in my notes unclear. Yeah, if you have a clear evaluation of this position, congratulations. But I don't know what it is. I really don't know. It looks very, very, very strange and difficult to evaluate. I think it's really not clear at all what's going on here. There's an alternative, by the way. Black also can play bishop h4 here. That's also interesting. Here white definitely will sacrifice the exchange. Also King's Gambit style. For example, this, and this, intending to go to f5, definitely gives white very nice compensation for the exchange. Sometimes also pawn to f5, queen f4 is an idea. So many interesting attacking ideas for white. Yeah, he decided to take the knight straight away. Pawn takes, knight g4. That's probably the most obvious move, let's say. If black goes back, again, queen h5, intending g6 is killing. There's no defense to this move. Yeah, g6, knight f6, rook f6. So nothing there. Black can play this move, just letting white take, but it's clear that here white will just pile up on the f-file and is just better without any particular problem arising for white. So this is also to be avoided. Knight g4 is the only challenging move really. Yeah, and g6 was played. The whole point of this operation, focusing on the f7 pawn. Very nice. Yeah, how should black defend? He went bishop g5. Yeah, let's start with some easy things. Knight f6 is again losing very quickly. Cannot do that. What happens if black is just ignoring everything? Let's say c6. That's in fact not an obvious losing move or something, but white, for example, I can just put this on the board. We had something similar earlier. This is just extremely awkward to play. Yeah, white has the idea g4, g5, comparable to the game. And yeah. I don't believe in this position at all. The computer is not as convinced. It just gives white a relatively moderate advantage, but it looks terrible in my book. Yeah, and c6 is also a move that doesn't do that much. A move that certainly was considered, I believe, is knight to h6 maybe. Just retreating the knight and covering f7. Here white has a number of options. He already has a draw in the back. That is always nice to have. This is the draw. Oops, rook f7 and rook f1. That gives white a strong looking attack, but this very cold-blooded defense is keeping things together. Queen f3. Yeah, that looks very scary. I mean, imagine that you have to calculate that. One misstep and you're checkmated. It is, however, a draw, yeah, like h5, for example, and rook f5. Again, scary, but
check,
this is only leading to a draw with this move, threatening queen g6 and mate, but this is defending. Very tricky. Knight h6 was a very serious possibility. White does not have to play like that, however. He has other ideas. What he can do is he can try to take on f7, start with that move, rook f7, bishop h6, takes with the pawn. Now rook f1 is a transposition to what we had earlier. But here, white also has alternatives. He can try this move, for example, trying to take with the queen and mate. And here, let's say bishop f6 takes.
check,
And then he can just continue the attack somehow. Let's say like this. I'm not sure about this position. The computer doesn't like it. It says black is better. But this is still very tricky to play. At least I understand if you see it, that you feel yeah, quite under pressure here, or that you feel like this might be a problem. Yeah, this is what he played, and it's not clear that it is a mistake at all, but it's maybe knight h6 was really better. I'm very conservative here with this game, with drawing any conclusions here in this attack, because it is very complicated, and even using a good computer engine, whatever, is not giving you a very conclusive result if you have limited time to check variations. So this is what happened. Takes, and knight h6 again. Oops. Loses quickly. Yeah, rook d8, rook f1 is the point, and black can resign with a clear conscience. Yeah, okay, we event knight h6. Yeah, now after the bishop trade, there's nothing to take this knight on h6, but this is a good move. An alternative was to play rook f7 here. That was very much possible, as knight takes, queen h5 loses immediately, and rook takes, pawn takes,
check,
king f8. Yeah, you cannot take with the knight. Oops, as rook f1 does win. So king f8, and now queen h5. This is a position where I couldn't really come up with a clear evaluation, but I think white's attack looks very, very strong. I mean, really, that's no task that you probably would like to have against a strong player, or against any player for that matter. Difficult to evaluate what the best way to play is. Anand played differently. He went queen h5. It's very, very comparable. Bishop e6. Yeah, I don't know. I also looked a bit at what happens if white is allowed to take. Yeah,
check,
like this. Then g4, g5 is decisive. This is a bit similar, like this. And now g4. It's really, really remarkable. This knight now is trapped on the edge of the board. The g5 move, g5 threat is very, very problematic. It seems that the next move is probably a mistake. But as mentioned, I'm very, very conservative here in my evaluations. Wesley So now played the move c6. And it seems that, if you can believe the engine, rook f4 is stronger. Yeah, why rook f4? The idea is that if white takes there, black is establishing a pawn on f4. That's a very useful pawn to have. In some lines, I can give you an example. Let's say g5, queen f8, and now the capture. This is a mistake, actually. White taking on h6. Yeah, and it's a mistake due to, what do my notes say? G takes h6, simply. And now the problem is that at the moment the g7 move is blocked. And in a case of this capture, all of a sudden black's queen is right in the thick of things, here and here. And it protects this. This is really awkward. So it's much better for white to play king g2 in this position. That's much better. And here white still has some chances to play for an advantage, but it is not clear to me at all. Let's say he plays rook e8, move like that. How does white continue? An idea that I had was to take on f4. Now queen takes, rook f1 is very good for white. Now we see that this is no problem at all. So e takes. And then I thought maybe king f3, yeah, trying to open up the g file so that we maybe can take on h6 and play g7 using the g pawn. But it's not a clear situation at all. Black might play something like this. You go rook g1, rook e7, yeah, h4. Let's use this move as well. We have time to take. d5 takes. Yeah, black can
check,
flick in this, take now, and let's say queen here, queen d8. And this is not clear. Again, I'm not sure what this is. Yeah, at first I thought white is better, but maybe that's not really the case. Black always has some counterplay with queen d4. There is no easy tactical win. I mean, the computer says 0-0-0. Of course, that's a really deep line. It just shows the enormous possibilities that were in this position. Maybe really rook f4 was a much better move than what he did. Yeah, he played this c6 move. Now Anand took on f8.
Check.
g5 immediately also was an interesting alternative, maybe a slightly stronger one. But yeah, there are limits what you can look at in an analysis. This was a very, yeah, something not obvious, but it was relatively easy to see a continuation that definitely nets white something. However, still, it's not clear to me that white wins here. Rook f8. G takes h6.
Check.
Takes
check.
The check there. Here. This looks very nice for white, yeah, with the g pawn, but is it a win? I'm not completely sure, and I'm showing you why. Queen f6, h4. Yeah, now he played the move d5. And it seems that this is not the right way to play, but it is very difficult, very difficult. I mean, what I'm basically doing is I look through the game, and just to show how I analyze this, think myself a little bit, make some annotation, and then compare it to the engine. And the engine pointed out that this is a serious mistake. This didn't occur to me at all, but later I understood why this might be a mistake. If black is not playing d5, he has an additional defensive resource. And this resource is the following. Let's say black plays a move like, what did I have in my annotation? Let's say a move like a5, kind of a nothing move, right? a5, and white tries h5, cementing this pawn. And h5... what do I have? Let's say c5. And now, how does white continue here? Let's say he plays queen f3, having in mind that this is a very good king and pawn endgame, probably a winning one. It should win, yeah, c3, d4. This is, however, completely irrelevant because black has this opportunity here. This is a very strong move. The idea is that the trade now is a direct draw, as this is a counterpart on equal grounds, f4 and g6. This is just totally equal. And how does white ever get ahead here against the queen on f4? White has a hard time to enter. He can try this, but then I'm stepping back. And how are you making progress now? We would see the difference in the game why d5 didn't help there. I think this was a tougher defense at least. Black is still in trouble, but not playing d5 seems to be better. Let's have a look at the game. d5, h5, d4 was played, b4, king g7, and now queen f3. The idea that we saw before. The big difference is, however, if black is going for this now, white takes and goes e5. This is only possible because the pawn is not on d6 anymore. And now white is just stepping up and picks up everything. So this crucial defensive idea is not possible anymore. And black has to play passively. And I think this is losing. This is simply losing. It's too passive. Yeah, Anand now opened up the center and was able to invade.
Check.
Yeah, it wasn't possible to defend this anymore. If black covers the e6 pawn, let's say, let's say like this, white is just taking and then pushing this to promotion.
Check.
Yeah, it was a losing end game. The final touch is coming shortly.
Check.
Quite nicely played by Anand. In this situation, not quite. Or is this? It is here. Yeah, he played the nice move d4. that's a very nice move. The idea is that if black takes it with the pawn and he's kind of out of alternatives, then white has a very simple win in queen f7 check. Just transposing into a winning king and pawn endgame. Like this, for example.
Check.
And white picks up both pawns and promotes his b-pawn. Yeah, so a great win for the former world champion Vachier-Lagrave against the now former tournament leader Wesley. So yeah, based on a nice opening idea, yeah, this knight g5 move, a very interesting way to get new life into this type of position with f4 coming up. Also a clear point of the move d3, the early d3 move that kept the rook on f1. Yeah, we had a very sharp and complicated game there, where it was difficult to tell where exactly black's mistake was. Yeah, it was very tough to get to grips with this game. I hope you enjoyed my overview there. I'm a bit hesitant to call it analysis because it was not very deep actually. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.